My name is Emma Carter, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd marry the man who nearly knocked me into Seattle's cold harbor on the rainiest day of the year, I would have laughed so hard I'd probably fall in by myself. But that's exactly how my love story began. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a quiet neighborhood where everybody knew everybody. My parents had been married for more than 30 years, and every anniversary my dad still brought my mom flowers. Watching them made me believe that true love really existed. After college, I moved to Seattle to work as an interior designer. I rented a tiny apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. It wasn't luxurious, but every morning I woke up to ferries crossing the water, seagulls flying overhead, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the cafe downstairs. I loved my routine. Every Friday after work, I walked through Pike Place Market. I'd buy flowers, fresh pastries, and sometimes listen to street musicians for an hour before going home. One October afternoon, Seattle decided to remind everyone why umbrellas are almost useless there. The wind was so strong it turned umbrellas inside out. Rain flew sideways. People were running in every direction trying to stay dry. I had just bought a hot caramel latte when someone crashed into me so hard that my coffee flew into the air. Time seemed to stop. The entire cup landed on a tall stranger wearing a dark blue jacket. His face froze. Mine did too. For 3 long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked down at himself. Then back at me. "I'm guessing this isn't your usual way of introducing yourself," he asked. I burst into laughter. Instead of getting angry, he laughed too. "I spent $600 on this jacket yesterday," he said. I nearly fainted. "Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry." He looked at the giant coffee stain. "I'll survive." Then the wind pushed one of the market signs loose. It swung toward me before I even realized what was happening. The stranger grabbed my arm and pulled me toward him just in time. The wooden sign crashed onto the pavement exactly where I'd been standing. My heart was pounding. So he smiled. "I think we're even." That was the first moment I met Ethan Brooks. He was 29, worked as a structural engineer, and somehow managed to stay calm even after losing an expensive jacket and almost being hit by a flying sign. He insisted on buying me another coffee. I agreed. We found a tiny coffee shop nearby. For 2 hours we talked about everything except work. Movies, travel, childhood memories, favorite foods. The strange weather in Washington felt strangely easy. When we finally walked outside, the rain had stopped. He asked if he could walk me home. I said yes. Halfway there, I realized I had left my phone at the cafe. I panicked. All my work contacts were inside it. We ran back together. The waitress smiled as soon as she saw us. "I knew one of you would come back." Relieved, I picked up my phone. As we left again, Ethan laughed. "I think fate really wants us to spend more time together." I smiled. "Maybe." Before saying goodbye, he asked for my number. This time I gave it to him. The very next morning I received a text. "Good news. No flying coffee today." I couldn't stop smiling. Over the next few weeks we met almost every weekend. Sometimes we'd ride the ferry just to watch the sunset. Other times we'd drive into the Cascade Mountains with no destination in mind. One Saturday we got completely lost after following an old hiking trail. Our phones had no signal. It started raining again. Course it did. We spent almost 3 hours trying to find the parking lot. Instead of arguing, we laughed the entire time. When we finally found Ethan's truck, we looked like we'd fallen into a river. He opened the trunk. "I always keep emergency clothes." "You planned this?" "No. I'm just overly prepared." He handed me one of his oversized hoodies. It smelled like cedar wood and coffee. I wore that hoodie almost every weekend after that. About 2 months later, Ethan invited me to dinner. He refused to tell me where we were going. When we arrived, I was confused. It wasn't a restaurant. It was an old ferry that had been transformed into a floating dining room. There were only 6 tables. Soft lights reflected across the water. A violinist played quietly near the windows. I remembered you once said you've never eaten dinner on the water, Ethan said. So I fixed that. Nobody had ever listened to small details about me like that before. Dinner lasted 4 hours. We talked until the staff politely informed us they were closing. As we walked outside, snowflakes began falling. The first snow of the year. Seattle almost never gets much snow. We stood silently watching it. Then Ethan looked at me. I'm really glad someone spilled coffee on me. I laughed. So am I. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe with another person. I had no idea that our biggest adventures and our hardest days were still waiting for us. When people ask me when I knew Ethan was different, I never talk about the coffee accident. I talk about the dog. 3 weeks after our dinner on the ferry, Ethan invited me to spend Saturday exploring Deception Pass State Park. He said it would be a relaxing hike. That should have been my first warning. About halfway across one of the trails, we heard frantic barking. Hidden beneath thick bushes was a frightened golden retriever with a leash tangled around a fallen tree. Poor dog had obviously been trapped for hours. Without hesitation, Ethan climbed down the muddy slope. His jeans were ruined. His jacket tore on a branch. He didn't care. 20 minutes later, the dog was free. Tag on his collar said his name was Cooper. We called the number on the tag. His owners had been searching for him since sunrise. When they finally arrived, an elderly couple burst into tears. The woman hugged Ethan so tightly he almost lost his balance. You gave us our family back, she whispered. On the drive home, I couldn't stop looking at him. Most people try to impress someone on a date with expensive restaurants or fancy cars. Ethan impressed me by helping someone when nobody was watching. That night I wrote one sentence in my journal. I think I'm falling in love. A few weeks later, Ethan surprised me again. He asked me to keep one Saturday completely free. No questions. No hints. When he picked me up before sunrise, he handed me a cup of hot chocolate. Trust me, he smiled. 2 hours later, we arrived in a wide green valley outside Seattle. Dozens of colorful hot air balloons were slowly filling with air. My jaw dropped. Months earlier, I had casually mentioned that riding in a hot air balloon was on my bucket list. I never imagined he'd remember. As we floated above Washington, the forest stretched to the horizon. Lakes reflected the morning sun like giant mirrors. Everything below looked peaceful. I wanted your first flight to be unforgettable, Ethan said. It already is. I reached for his hand without even thinking. That was the moment we officially became a couple. Life became wonderfully unpredictable after that. We started creating little traditions. Every Sunday morning we tried a different coffee shop somewhere in Washington. Every month we visited a place neither of us had ever seen. Sometimes we drove for hours with no destination. Some of our best memories came from getting completely lost. One rainy afternoon, Ethan called me while I was working. Come outside. When I opened the office door, there he was, standing in the rain, holding 2 ridiculous yellow raincoats. We're going dancing. In the rain. Exactly. People stared at us as we danced in the middle of a nearly empty street while music played from his truck. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Months passed faster than I wanted. Then Christmas arrived. I had spent nearly 5 months secretly working on Ethan's gift. His grandfather had left him an old wristwatch that no longer worked. Every jeweler he visited said it couldn't be repaired. I wasn't ready to accept that. After searching everywhere, I found a retired watchmaker in a small Washington town. Together we restored every tiny piece. On Christmas morning, Ethan opened the wooden box. For several seconds he couldn't speak. The old watch began ticking again. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "You did this. It belongs with you." He hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might break. I don't think anyone has ever given me something this meaningful. I smiled. "You've given me reasons to smile every single day. I figured it was your turn." A month later, Ethan insisted we celebrate my birthday early. He refused to tell me anything. He drove me to a private airport outside Seattle. I looked at him nervously. "Ethan, we're not jumping out of anything." "Good." He laughed. Instead, he had arranged a scenic flight over Mount Rainier. As the airplane climbed above the clouds, I could barely believe what I was seeing. Snow-covered peaks glowed beneath the afternoon sun. The rivers looked like silver ribbons winding through endless forests. Halfway through the flight, the pilot handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Ethan. It listed 100 reasons he loved me. Not because I was perfect, 'cause I made ordinary days feel extraordinary. By the time I reached reason number 43, I was crying so hard I could barely read. When we landed, I kissed him before he could even ask whether I liked his surprise. Spring arrived. We had now been together for almost 2 years. Friends kept asking the same question. "So, who's proposing first?" We always laughed. Neither of us seemed to be in a hurry. Or at least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I realize Ethan had been planning something much bigger than I could have imagined. And the proposal that changed our lives forever was only a few weeks away. People always imagine marriage proposals as perfectly planned moments. Candles, flowers, a beautiful speech. Our story was a little different. It happened on a warm June evening in Washington. Ethan invited me to spend the weekend on San Juan Island. He said we both needed a break from work. Nothing about the trip seemed unusual. We rented bicycles, explored the coastline, ate seafood at tiny local restaurants, and spent hours watching the sunset over the Pacific. On our last evening, Ethan suggested one final walk before heading back to the hotel. The sky was painted orange and pink. The air smelled like salt and pine trees. We reached a quiet cliff overlooking the water. "I'll be right back," Ethan said. Before I could ask where he was going, he disappeared behind a group of trees. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I started getting worried. "Ethan?" I called. No answer. I walked farther down the trail. Still nothing. My heart began racing. Just as I pulled out my phone to call him, I heard music. A single violin. Then another. Following the sound, I stepped into a small clearing. I froze. Dozens of tiny lights hung from the trees. Friends and family stood smiling in complete silence. In the middle of the clearing was Ethan, wearing the same nervous smile I'd seen the day we first met. "I guess disappearing wasn't the best part of my plan," he laughed. Everyone chuckled. He walked toward me. "Emma, the best thing that has ever happened to me started with spilled coffee. I've spent 2 years trying to deserve the chance you gave me that day. You've made every ordinary moment feel extraordinary. I don't promise a perfect life. I promise you'll never have to face it alone." Then he slowly knelt on one knee. "Will you marry me?" I didn't even let him finish. "Yes." People cheered. Someone started clapping. My mom was already crying. His father looked even more emotional than she was. Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger. Fit perfectly. I guessed your size. How? You fell asleep during a movie once? I borrowed one of your rings. I laughed so hard I nearly cried again. That night became one of the happiest nights of our lives. A month later, wedding planning officially began. Neither of us wanted an extravagant celebrity-style wedding. We wanted something elegant, warm, and personal. We chose a beautiful vineyard outside Seattle. Rows of green vines stretched across rolling hills. The ceremony would take place beneath a massive white oak tree. The reception would be held under thousands of hanging lights. Emma's father would walk her down the aisle. Ethan's grandfather's restored watch would be part of the ceremony. Instead of expensive party favors, we decided every guest would receive a small handwritten thank you letter. People told us they'd never seen a couple so involved in every detail. We designed the invitations ourselves. We tasted dozens of wedding cakes before choosing a vanilla cake with raspberry filling. We practiced our first dance every Wednesday evening in our living room. Usually we laughed more than we danced. One evening I accidentally stepped on Ethan's foot so hard he pretended he needed an ambulance. Another time he spun me too quickly and we both crashed into the couch. We couldn't stop laughing. Everything finally seemed perfect. Exactly 3 days before the wedding, family members started arriving from different states. Suitcases filled the house. The phone never stopped ringing. Flowers had been delivered. The photographer confirmed the schedule. The musicians had arrived. Our wedding clothes were hanging safely in garment bags. For the first time in months, we relaxed. "We actually made it," I whispered. Finn smiled. "Nothing can stop this wedding now." Those words would come back to haunt us. That night, Washington was hit by one of the strongest windstorms the region had seen in years. The wind howled through the trees. Rain slammed against the windows. Power flickered across entire neighborhoods. Around 6 the next morning, my phone rang. It was the wedding planner. Her voice was shaking. "Emma, I'm so sorry. The reception tent has collapsed. The oak tree lost several huge branches. The stage is destroyed. Emergency crews have closed the property." I couldn't speak. I looked at Ethan. He already knew. One look at my face was enough. Neither of us said a word for almost a minute. Then he quietly sat beside me. He took my hand. "It's just a wedding. We still have each other." I wanted to believe him. But after nearly a year of planning, it felt like watching a dream disappear overnight. By noon, every guest had been informed. The ceremony was officially canceled. Friends tried to cheer us up by organizing an informal dinner that evening. Instead of celebrating a marriage, we sat around long tables sharing stories, eating comfort food, and trying to laugh through the disappointment. Near the end of the night, Ethan stood up and raised his glass. "I know today didn't happen the way we imagined, but I didn't fall in love with a wedding. I fell in love with Emma. And whether it takes another month or another year, I will marry that woman." Everyone applauded. Kissed him. For the first time that terrible day, I smiled. I truly believed the worst was finally behind us. I had no idea life was preparing an even greater test, one that would change everything between us. If someone had told me that lightning could strike the same place twice, I would have smiled politely and said that wasn't how life worked. I was wrong. After the first canceled wedding, Ethan and I promised ourselves one thing: we wouldn't let disappointment define us. For a few weeks, we avoided talking about weddings altogether. Instead, we took short road trips around Washington, watched old movies on rainy evenings, and tried to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. Slowly, the sadness faded. One evening, nearly 6 months later, Ethan looked at me across the dinner table. "So?" I raised an eyebrow. "So? I I think we've spent enough time hiding from one bad day. I smiled. You want to plan another wedding? I want to marry you. That was all I needed to hear. This time we decided to keep everything much simpler. A small ceremony. Only close family and our closest friends. A beautiful lakeside lodge near Leavenworth, Washington. No giant tents. No complicated decorations. No months of endless planning. Just love. For the first time in a long while, everything felt light again. My mom helped me choose a new wedding dress. It wasn't as extravagant as the first one. Somehow, I loved it even more. Ethan joked that he had learned enough about flowers to become a florist. Every evening he came home carrying another tiny decoration or another handwritten list. One Saturday we spent 5 straight hours folding paper place cards. Halfway through, we realized we'd misspelled one guest's name on nearly every card. We laughed until our stomachs hurt and started over. Those little moments reminded me why I wanted to spend my life with him. Then, 4 days before the wedding, Finn called me from work. His voice sounded strange. I don't feel very well. I assumed it was exhaustion. He had been working long hours to finish a major engineering project before taking time off. Go home and rest, I told him. By evening his fever had climbed dangerously high. The next morning it was even worse. He could barely breathe. I drove him to the emergency room. Doctors admitted him immediately with a severe case of pneumonia. Watching nurses will him away was one of the scariest moments of my life. The doctor later sat beside me. He's going to recover, but it will take time. There's absolutely no chance he'll be able to attend a wedding this week. I stared at the floor. I didn't even cry. I just felt empty. When I walked into Ethan's hospital room later that evening, he forced a smile. I guess I'm really terrible at showing up to my own weddings. I laughed through my tears. You owe me a honeymoon for this. Deal. 4 days later. Instead of walking down the aisle, I was sitting beside his hospital bed reading him messages from family members who had traveled across the country once again. Everyone tried to stay positive, but disappointment hung in the air like a heavy fog. When Ethan was finally discharged several days later, we believed life would return to normal. Instead, something between us had quietly changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, just little things. We became more tired, more impatient, more distracted. Wedding expenses had drained much of our savings. Ethan buried himself in work. I accepted more design projects than I should have. Weeks passed where we barely ate dinner together. Sometimes we'd only exchange a few sentences before falling asleep. One night I forgot about our date because of an important client meeting. Another evening, Ethan missed my parents' anniversary dinner because he stayed late at the office. Neither of us meant to hurt the other. But disappointment slowly became resentment. We stopped laughing as much. We stopped taking spontaneous road trips. Even Sunday mornings at our favorite coffee shops disappeared. One rainy evening, I found the unopened box containing our wedding decorations in the garage. I just stood there looking at it. Dust had begun settling on the ribbons. I quietly closed the box. When Ethan came home, I asked him a question I'd been avoiding for weeks. Do you still want to get married? He looked shocked. Emma, of course I do. Then why does it feel like everything else comes first? He sighed heavily. I'm trying to rebuild what we've lost. So am I. No, he answered quietly. You're trying to relive what we had, and I'm trying to protect what we still have. Neither of us realized how exhausted the other had become. Instead of listening, we defended ourselves. That conversation lasted almost 3 hours. Neither of us yelled. But sometimes calm voices can hurt even more than screaming. When we finally went to bed, we slept facing opposite walls. Over the following weeks, those conversations became more frequent. About money, about work, about time, about the future. Each disagreement ended with silence, and silence slowly became the loudest sound in our home. Looking back now, I don't think either of us wanted to win those arguments. We simply wanted to feel understood. But neither of us knew how to say it anymore. The worst night of our relationship was now only days away, and neither of us had any idea that one conversation would change everything. Looking back now, I wish I could remember exactly what started the argument. But that's the strange thing about relationships. The biggest fights are rarely about one single moment. They're built from hundreds of little disappointments that quietly pile up until one day everything falls apart. It was a Thursday evening in late November. Seattle was wrapped in cold rain and gray skies. I had spent the entire day meeting with clients. Finn had been at work since before sunrise. When he finally walked through the front door, I could see how exhausted he was. His tie was loose. His shoulders slumped. There were dark circles under his eyes. Normally, I would have hugged him. That night, neither of us moved. "I thought we'd have dinner together," I said. "I'm sorry. The project ran late. It always runs late." He placed his keys on the table. "I can't control everything." "No," I replied quietly. "But lately it feels like you don't even try." He looked at me for several seconds. "You think I don't try?" "I think you've stopped fighting for us." The room fell silent. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, years of unspoken frustration finally found a voice. For nearly 2 hours we argued. Not about dishes. Not about money. Not even about the weddings. We argued because we no longer recognized the people standing in front of us. "You don't need me anymore," Ethan finally said. I stared at him. "What?" "You've built a life where I'm just another appointment on your calendar." I felt something break inside me. "And what about you?" "You spend more time answering emails than talking to me." Neither of us was completely right. Neither of us was completely wrong. That made it hurt even more. Finally, Ethan whispered something I'll never forget. "Maybe we've been trying so hard to save this relationship that we forgot how to actually live in it." I picked up my suitcase. He didn't stop me. Maybe he thought I just needed a night away. Maybe I thought the same. But as I placed my engagement ring on the kitchen counter, his face turned completely pale. "Emma, I need space. Please don't do this." Tears filled my eyes. "If I stay tonight, we'll only hurt each other more." He took one step toward me, then stopped. Neither of us knew what to say. I walked out the front door. The rain immediately soaked my coat. I loaded my suitcase into my car. For 1 second, I almost turned around. Almost. Instead, I drove east across Washington toward Spokane, where my parents still lived. The drive felt endless. Every mile felt like another piece of my heart was being left behind. When I arrived just after midnight, my mom opened the front door before I even knocked. She didn't ask questions. She simply hugged me. I cried harder than I had in years. The next morning, Ethan called. I couldn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Emma, I don't know how we got here. I just want you to know that I still love you. I'll wait until you're ready to talk." The next day he called again. Then again. After a week, calls stopped. First I thought he had given up. Months later I learned the truth. He hadn't stopped caring. He had stopped believing his voice could reach me. Life in Spokane felt strangely quiet. I helped my dad repair the old porch. I baked with my mom. I tried convincing everyone and myself that I was fine. But every little reminder brought Ethan back into my thoughts. Coffee mug. A hiking trail. A song on the radio. Even rain. Especially rain. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, our apartment became painfully silent. Friends later told me Ethan barely left the house except to go to work. The guitar I had restored for him stayed untouched in the corner of the living room. The wedding photos we never got to take existed only as empty picture frames we had already bought. He stopped answering invitations. He stopped going hiking. He canceled plans with friends. One evening his best friend Ryan visited unexpectedly. He found Ethan sitting on the living room floor surrounded by unopened mail. "You can't keep living like this," Ryan said. Ethan didn't answer. "You need help." For the first time in his life, Ethan admitted the words he had been afraid to say. "I don't think I know how to be happy anymore." Ryan sat beside him. "You don't have to figure it out alone." That conversation became the turning point. Not because everything suddenly became better, but because Ethan finally accepted that he couldn't fight the darkness by himself. While I believed our story had already ended, his greatest battle was only beginning, and neither of us knew whether love alone would ever be enough to bring us back together. People often imagine that healing happens all at once. One breakthrough, one perfect day, one moment when everything suddenly feels normal again. That wasn't Ethan's story, and in many ways it wasn't mine either. Months after we separated, I was still living with my parents in Spokane. I had found freelance design work and tried to keep myself busy. From the outside, my life looked peaceful. Inside, I still reached for my phone whenever something funny happened. I still wanted to tell Ethan. I just didn't. Later, Ryan told me what had happened after I left. The morning after our argument, Ethan woke up and instinctively reached across the bed. It was empty. He stared at the ceiling for nearly an hour before getting up. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum filled with memories. My favorite mug was still on the kitchen shelf. My sweater still hung by the front door. Our hiking boots were still waiting in the closet. He couldn't bring himself to move any of it. For weeks he lived the same day over and over. Wake up. Go to work. Come home. Sit in silence. Sleep. Repeat. Ryan kept checking on him. Sometimes Ethan wouldn't even answer the door. So Ryan started bringing dinner anyway. One evening, he placed 2 containers of food on the kitchen table. "You've lost almost 15 pounds, he said. "I'm not hungry. I don't care. You need to eat." They sat there in silence for several minutes. Then Ryan looked directly at him. "You miss Emma." Finn nodded. "You blame yourself." Another nod. "And you're trying to carry all of this alone." Finn finally spoke. "I don't even recognize the man I've become." Ryan leaned forward. "Then stop trying to become the man you were. Become someone better." Those words stayed with Ethan. The following Monday, he scheduled his first appointment with a therapist. He almost canceled 3 times before walking through the door. Instead of judging him, the therapist simply listened. For the first time in months, Ethan spoke honestly about everything. Canceled weddings. The pressure. The arguments. The guilt. The fear of losing the person he loved most. He left that office emotionally exhausted. But for the first time, he also felt a tiny spark of hope. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some mornings were still incredibly difficult. There were days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. But he kept showing up. Week after week. Little by little, life began to change. He started taking short walks before work, then longer walks. Soon he was hiking again. The same mountains that once reminded him of me slowly became places where he learned to breathe again. He joined a small fitness class. First, he could barely finish the workouts. Instead of quitting, he kept coming back. Every small victory mattered. One more mile. One more workout. One more good day. He also picked up his grandfather's old guitar. The same guitar I had restored for him. First, he only played for 5 minutes. Then 10. Eventually, music returned to the apartment. His therapist encouraged him to write down 3 things he was grateful for every evening. First, the list was painfully short. A warm cup of coffee. Call from Ryan. The sunset. Weeks later, the lists became longer. A successful meeting at work. A good workout. A stranger smiling at me. Laughing for the first time in months. Around the same time, Ethan made another important decision. Instead of working endless overtime, he accepted a promotion that gave him more responsibility but also a healthier schedule. For years, he had believed success meant sacrificing everything. Now he was learning that success meant protecting the things that truly mattered. He even volunteered on weekends with a local organization that repaired homes for elderly residents. Helping other people reminded him that his own pain wasn't the end of the story. Meanwhile, I knew none of this. I still believed he had moved on. One rainy afternoon, I drove past a little bookstore in Spokane. In the window sat a copy of my favorite novel. The same novel Ethan and I had once read together. Without thinking, I bought it. When I opened it at home, a small receipt fell out. On the back, someone had written, "Some stories deserve another chapter." I smiled through tears. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. For the first time in almost a year, instead of remembering only our heartbreak, I remembered why I had fallen in love with him. Neither of us knew it yet, but fate had already started bringing our paths back together. And the next time we met, everything would change. People always ask if I believed in fate. For a long time, my answer was no. I thought life was simply a series of choices. But then came the afternoon that changed everything. Nearly a year had passed since I left Seattle. I had built a quiet life in Spokane. I was working again, spending time with my parents and learning how to smile without pretending. But there was one thing I never managed to do. I never stopped loving Ethan. One Friday morning, my mother walked into the kitchen holding an old family photo album. "We're driving to Seattle this weekend," she said. "Your aunt is celebrating her 60th birthday." My heart skipped a beat. Seattle. I hadn't been back since the day I drove away. For a moment, I considered staying home. Instead, I took a deep breath. Maybe it was finally time to stop running from the city that held so many memories. Saturday afternoon, after the family lunch, I told my parents I wanted to take a walk alone. Without thinking, my feet carried me toward Pike Place Market, the same place where a cup of coffee had changed my life. Everything looked familiar. The flower stands, the musicians, the smell of roasted coffee. Even the sound of the seagulls felt like an old friend. I smiled as memories flooded back. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Emma." My entire body froze. Slowly, I turned around. There he was. Ethan. He looked different. Healthier. Stronger. His shoulders were no longer weighed down. His smile was nervous but real. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he laughed softly. "I guess the market still likes bringing us together." I smiled. I was thinking the same thing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was filled with everything we had never said. "How have you been?" he asked. I thought about giving the polite answer. Instead, I told the truth. I've missed you. His eyes filled with tears. I've missed you every single day. Neither of us tried to pretend we had moved on. There was no point. He pointed toward the same little coffee shop where we'd shared our first conversation years earlier. Would you? Like another coffee accident? I laughed. As long as you're paying this time. For nearly 4 hours we talked. Really talked. Not like we had during those final months together. We spoke honestly. About therapy. About fear. About pride. About the mistakes we had both made. Ethan looked at me. I spent months blaming myself. So did I admitted. I thought losing you meant I'd failed. I reached across the table and took his hand. We both forgot something. What? We weren't fighting each other. We were fighting life. Neither of us had ever said those words before. When the cafe announced it was closing, neither of us wanted to leave. So we walked along the waterfront until sunset. Just like we used to. Conversation felt easy again. We laughed. We teased each other. At one point, Ethan looked at me and smiled. You know, I almost brought coffee just in case history wanted to repeat itself. I laughed so hard people walking past turned to look at us. Over the next few months, we didn't rush anything. We started over. First came short phone calls. Then dinners. Then weekend hikes. We rebuilt trust one conversation at a time. If something bothered us, we talked about it immediately. No silence. No pretending. No waiting until resentment grew. One evening, while watching the sunset from Cary Park, Ethan quietly said, I used to think love was enough. I looked at him. And now, I think love is the reason to keep choosing each other every day. Those words stayed with me. Winter slowly turned into spring. Exactly 1 year after we had unexpectedly met again, Ethan invited me to Pike Place Market. I smiled the moment he told me where we were going. You planned something. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, he said with the worst fake smile in history. As we reached the spot where we had first collided years earlier, I noticed something unusual. Friends. Family. Ryan. My parents. His parents. Even the elderly couple whose dog, Cooper, we had rescued years before. They were all standing there. Then I noticed a small table. On it sat 2 cups of coffee. One was carefully balanced on the edge. Exactly like the day we met. Ethan walked over, picked up 1 cup, and intentionally tipped it onto his own jacket. Everyone gasped, then burst into laughter. He looked at me with the same smile I had fallen in love with years ago. I figured I'd save you the embarrassment this time. I couldn't stop laughing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, then slowly knelt on one knee. Emma Carter, the first time I asked you to marry me, I promised we'd face life together. I still mean every word. But this time I'm asking as a different man. A man who knows that love isn't about perfect days. It's about staying when life becomes difficult. He opened the box. Inside was the same engagement ring. I don't want a perfect wedding. I just want a lifetime with you. Will you marry me? One last time. Tears streamed down my face before I even realized I was crying. I nodded again and again. Yes. There was never going to be another answer. Everyone cheered. Ryan hugged Ethan so hard they almost both fell over. My father wiped tears from his eyes. My mother whispered, I knew these 2 would find their way back. As Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger again, I quietly whispered, This time, we're getting married. He smiled. This time, nothing is stopping us. People say that the third time is the charm. For us, truly was. The morning of our wedding arrived with something we hadn't seen on either of our first two wedding dates. Bright blue skies. I woke up before sunrise, convinced something had gone wrong. For several minutes, I simply lay in bed, waiting for my phone to ring. No calls. No emergencies. No storms. No hospitals. Just silence. For the first time in years. Silence felt peaceful. My bridesmaids arrived just after 7 in the morning carrying breakfast, coffee, and enough excitement to wake the entire neighborhood. My mother helped me into my dress. As she buttoned the last button, neither of us spoke. She simply looked at me through the mirror. "You look happy," she whispered. "I am." Then she smiled. "No. You're peaceful." I realized she was right. Meanwhile, Ethan was getting ready with his father and Ryan. Ryan adjusted Ethan's tie before laughing. "You know, statistically speaking, you've attended more canceled weddings than anyone I know." Everyone burst into laughter. Even Ethan. "Let's try not to set any new records today." The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden overlooking Puget Sound. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music floated through the air. Close family and friends filled the rows of chairs. Nothing felt extravagant. Everything felt meaningful. When the music changed, the guests stood. My father offered me his arm. "Ready?" I looked toward Ethan. The moment our eyes met, everything else disappeared. Every canceled plan, every argument, every tear, every lonely night, all of it had led to this moment. As I began walking down the aisle, I noticed Ethan quietly wiping away tears. Ryan leaned over and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I told you he'd cry first." The guests laughed. Even Ethan couldn't stop smiling. When I reached him, he took both of my hands. "They're shaking," I whispered. "So are mine." The officiant welcomed everyone. Instead of rushing through the ceremony, he invited us to tell our own story. Ethan spoke first. "I used to believe love meant protecting someone from every storm." He looked into my eyes. "But Emma taught me something much greater. Love isn't avoiding storms. It's holding hands while walking through them." When it was my turn, I took a deep breath. I've loved Ethan on easy days. I've loved him on impossible days. But the love I'm most proud of is the one that found its way back after we both learned how to become better people. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Even the photographer quietly wiped away tears. Then came the rings. The same rings that had waited through 3 wedding dates. This time, nothing interrupted the moment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Before the officiant could finish his sentence, Ethan kissed me. The guests erupted into applause. Someone shouted, "Third time really is the charm." The celebration began immediately. Instead of a formal cocktail hour, we organized little stations that represented different chapters of our relationship. One table served coffee in honor of the day we met. Another displayed our hiking boots and photographs from adventures across Washington. One corner featured Ethan's restored guitar, where guests could write song requests for the evening. Near the entrance stood 3 picture frames. The first read, "Wedding Attempt Number 1." The frame was empty. The second read, "Wedding Attempt Number 2." Also empty. The third held a photograph taken only minutes earlier. Below it were the words, "Worth every wait." Guests smiled as they walked past. The reception was filled with laughter. Ryan gave the first toast. I've watched Ethan survive engineering deadlines, mountain trails, and 2 canceled weddings. He paused dramatically. But nothing has ever scared him more than asking Emma where she wanted to eat. The room exploded with laughter. Then my father stood. I used to think my job was to protect my daughter. He looked at Ethan. Today I realized something. You've been protecting each other all along. Later that evening, Ethan surprised everyone. He picked up his grandfather's restored guitar. The same guitar I had secretly repaired years earlier. I'm not a professional musician, he admitted. But this song belongs to Emma. He played a gentle melody he had written during the months we were apart. By the time he finished, I was crying again. So was half the room. Then the band announced our first dance. As we stepped onto the dance floor, Ethan smiled. Try not to step on my feet. No promises. Halfway through the song, I accidentally stepped on his shoe. We both laughed so hard we nearly lost the rhythm. The guests applauded anyway. That imperfect little moment somehow became everyone's favorite memory of the evening. After dinner came dancing. Children raced across the lawn chasing glowing balloons. Grandparents danced together beneath strings of lights. Friends filled the photo booth with ridiculous costumes. At one point, Ryan convinced Ethan's father to join a dance competition. Nobody expected the 65-year-old man to perform an incredible swing dance routine. Crowd went wild. Around midnight, food trucks rolled into the venue serving tacos, burgers, fresh donuts, and hot chocolate. Guests gathered around fire pits telling stories about us. There were no strangers anymore. Only one big family. 2 in the morning, someone started singing. Soon everyone joined in. The music echoed across the water. When the final song ended, Ethan and I quietly slipped away from the crowd and walked toward the shoreline. The moon reflected across the calm water. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Ethan squeezed my hand. Do you ever wish we'd had the first wedding? I smiled. No. He looked surprised. Really? If we'd married back then, we would have been 2 people who still had a lot to learn. I rested my head on his shoulder. But today, I married my best friend. He kissed my forehead. And I married the strongest woman I've ever known. As the first light of sunrise appeared over Puget Sound, our family and friends gathered behind us for one final photograph. No perfect poses. No rehearsed smiles. Just real people celebrating a real love story. Looking at that photograph today, I don't remember the canceled weddings. I don't remember the arguments. I don't even remember the loneliness. I remember something much more important. Love isn't measured by how easily 2 people reach the altar. It's measured by whether they keep choosing each other, even after life gives them every reason to walk away. And if you ever visit Pike Place Market on a rainy afternoon, you might see 2 people smiling every time someone accidentally spills a cup of coffee. 'Cause sometimes, the greatest love stories begin with the smallest accidents.